Hey again, everybody. It's me, Jeff, the SB Spaz, and back with Justin again to finish up the questions we were asked before by Typecast Heroes, which I believe I forgot to include the link in the last link video description, so I'll try to remember to do that in this one and put it in the first part. But anyway, so I think Justin said he didn't get a chance to answer the one about what does the inside of your mind look like. So
no, not that one. It was
not that one. Well, yeah. What was number 2 for you? I don't remember.
It was number 2, about being an adrenaline junkie.
Oh, okay. So yeah, I didn't get that one. So I'll let you read the question and answer that.
All right. Oh wait, I'm in the wrong thing. Hold on just a second.
Apparently, they don't feel that ESFPs are adrenaline junkies, so I didn't get that question.
Even though I'm sure a lot are, but excuse me.
Yeah, it's just different things that inspire it, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Basically, oh wait, no, I was wrong. It was number 1. Never mind. That's why you thought it was the described inside of your mind. Okay. My number 1 was there's a stereotype surrounding ESTPs that they're adrenaline junkies. Is this an accurate depiction? This one's kind of, oh, you're playing with the camera angles again.
I already forgot again the one that puts it on just you, so I was trying to figure that out.
Cool. Okay, I'll just ignore that. Anyway, yeah, adrenaline junkies. Okay, so like when I read that question, I was like, well, what exactly, like, I guess I could have asked her, but what exactly does that mean? Does like mean I'm trying to like go bungee jumping every weekend or something like that? And it's like, well, I mean, it's not like, I mean, so, a good portion of society is made up of SPs and ESTPs, or I guess we're more like 6-7% or something, maybe 10%, depending on what estimate you're going by. But I mean, the people who actually go thrill seeking all the time are probably like a very slim portion of society. But as far as do I take every opportunity to do that? Yes, absolutely. I mean, and I love the crap out of that. So if someone wants to take me on a motorcycle ride or whatever, or if I have a chance to go to the theme park or something like that, or there's lots of things I have on my bucket list. Like I never bungee jumped or or skydived or anything, but I'm totally down for it. And I want to get one of those flying squirrel suits. If you ever seen those where like it has the like flying squirrels have those that skin between their appendages where they can glide to the air and everything. That'd be pretty fun. But probably takes some training and whatnot. But I mean, yeah, those I love to do that type of stuff. It's not like necessarily I do it all the time, like but yeah, absolutely. And so it's not like like the stereotype would be that we're always going out there doing stuff like that all the time, and that's not necessarily true. I mean, I like to spend my energy. I dance a lot, to music and stuff like that. And I like to go to the gym and whatnot, that kind of thing. But it's not like always over the top, that kind of stuff. But yeah, I do have a lot of energy. I like to spend it and have fun and whatnot. But sometimes I do crazy things like I'll run out in front of a bus if I'm late for a bus. And I don't do that much anymore, but I've been pretty reckless at times and freaks people out. Like my wife, she's like, "Oh my gosh, you better be more careful," and whatnot. So I take a lot of risks and stuff. But as I grow older, I'm a little more careful now. But yeah, in general, like and one thing I used to like, I never was that much into sports, really. But I don't know why. This just wasn't my thing. I was more like into rock and roll and stuff. I was into punk rock. Like I don't remember if I mentioned that the last time, the first video. But I used to go to shows and we just go in the pit and stuff. And even now, like I went to an MXPX show a couple years ago. Got into the pit and whatnot. And one time I gave my friend a bloody nose because it gets that crazy. It's just people like almost trampling over each other. But usually people try to help each other out in the pit. but like getting that adrenaline rush and whatnot, yeah, I definitely am all for that. I live for that kind of thing. But I take the opportunities that I'm given or that I see. It's not like I'm doing it like constantly over the top, that kind of thing. So I guess that kind of answers the question. You know, and by the way, I hate that there's not that many theme parks up here in Washington. Like there's a bunch in Texas, and we used to go to Six Flags all the time down there. But anyway, that's one bummer up here. But yeah, I love to do stuff like that. So I guess that answers that question.
Yeah, you had mentioned before also wanting to talk about some of the differences between ESFPs and ESTPs. So I thought I could ask you about that because I was looking actually in the personology book for a specific thing that I wanted to find. But while I'm trying to do that, some people say, you know, the difference between and sort of the TF difference is sort of in the focus of like the thinking types are kind of more focused on like objects or the action, you know, as opposed to like its effect on people. So when you talk about like the adrenaline junkie aspects or whatever that you were talking about, do you feel like when you're doing any of that stuff that you're ever like doing any of that to like show off for people or impress people in any way, or is it more that you're into the action itself?
Oh, it's more just into the action. Yeah. I mean, sometimes I like to show off a little bit, but sometimes that's a little more awkward for me because it's like I don't know what it is. Like I think probably that is one of the differences between our types because you're an ESFP. It's like you'd probably be a little more comfortable with that, and sometimes I'm like. I don't know, but just don't have the feel of it, you know? Like maybe you have more of that feel of where the crowd's at, and I'm kind of like coming at it from the outside, and I'm more comfortable thinking through things, kind of more of a logical, kind of if this then that kind of mindset, you know, just critical thinking and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, I think it's more. I mean, I don't. It's not that. Words are escaping me, but it's not like that. It's at the forefront of my mind of thinking of how it affects other people or impressing other people or whatnot. You know, but to me, it's really the thrill of the action itself is what I love the most, and whatever crowd effect that has is more secondary, I guess. Because I could like act totally stupid or act like. In a way that just to like throw everybody off or just to do something that either they wouldn't expect or that they wouldn't like me to do just to be like some kind of rebel. I would just as soon do that than I would to try to be a crowd pleaser or anything like that. So I don't know. But I guess that falls under that though, doesn't it? Being an entertainer.
I think this may have been what I knew there was something about like, and I may be remembering the way it was worded in Brains and Careers rather than personality, but it was something about, you know, my type, the performer being like sort of requiring audience feedback more than any other type. And I think the way that it's worded in here, it says to collaborate is to labor together, while similarly to cooperate is to operate together in common purpose. That common purpose in the case of the performer is that viewers are entertained. Yet the performance or show or demonstration is not entertaining as it's said to be a flop. However, much self-appointed critics may praise it. Note that neither the composer, the promoter, nor the crafter requires the level of collaboration required by the performer.
Yeah.
So it's kind of, again, it's a matter of degree. It's not saying, you know, that you wouldn't want to impress somebody. It's just not your primary focus. So when I'm trying to be entertaining, if I'm not entertaining, then that's more important. So that's why I'm not, you know, a good example I think of that is actually I was invited to a party once where we were playing. I guess it's called Mario Party. Now that I think about it, you know, so like one of those games is like, you know, like 8 people or something can play at a time. So I didn't know, because it's the first time I'd ever played a game, I think, on that particular system, or at least, at least if I had before, I didn't remember. It was the first time I'd used a controller that actually vibrated.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And so I was unaware that it was going to do that until it did it when I did something, and I like threw the controller out of my hand, like I jumped, and everybody thought that was so funny that, of course, the next time it happened, it became like a recurring thing of like me just really exaggeratingly, like, acting like the controller was possessed or something like that, So it was much more fun, to do, like, to find the entertaining thing than it was to like be good at the game itself. Like,
right.
It was more fun to be entertaining to the other people playing, because I knew it was probably not a chance I was going to like win the game. So if you can't win the game, then you might as well just be goofy with it. So that was, sort of became my primary focus.
And for me, that's like, that would be a sacrifice. Like, I'm going to give up, possibly winning to just get a few laughs. Like, no, I'm going to win this game.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is I always tell people that artisans in general, like, want to win the moment, but there's many ways of doing that.
Right.
It doesn't necessarily have to be like, in a way that some people might consider winning. There's different ways of winning, within that. And so if I feel like, I'm the one entertaining people, then I'm winning regardless of what I'm actually doing in the particular action.
I was just, when you're talking about like getting, like, focusing on audience feedback and all that, and what people are, how they're responding to your performance, there is some of that in terms of, like, and by the way, we're talking about books by Kersey. So Personology by Kersey, and then Brains and Careers was an earlier edition of that. But anyway, so he calls ESTPs promoters, each have a copy. So blah, blah, blah. They keep their eyes on their audience, ever on the lookout for signs of ascent or descent, and with nerves and steel and ice in their veins, they will use this information to achieve the end they pursue, which is to sell the customer, or as they sometimes say, cool the mark. Winning people over this kind of brinkmanship might seem exhausting to others, but those who enact this role skillfully are exhilarated by working close to the edge. Indeed, a theme of seeking excitement through taking risks runs throughout their lives. So, by the way, Kersey focuses more on the social sort of aspect of ESTPs. I think pretty much all the types. He's talking about the way they kind of interact with basically, I guess, their social, the way they appear socially, and at least that's the impression I get reading a lot of those descriptions. But so he doesn't like, I know the MBTI community tends to focus more on the active adrenaline aspect, the athletic aspect of ESTPs, but Kersey talked a lot about the way ESTPs actually, he talks more about athleticism and adrenaline and all that kind of stuff with ISTPs, but anyway, there's definitely overlap there. But anyway,
sure. And that's one thing that I kind of liked about the way Kersey did it, starting with the second Please Understand Me. In all of the books that followed, he kind of, when he went through the individual type, he would kind of start off by sort of reminding, here's the things they have in common with all the other types of that temperament, So it was sort of like the others, they share these things, and now here's a few ways they might be different.
Yeah, and he talked a lot about, because I know people tend to think that he had boxes, they had people in stereotypes and whatnot. It's really not true, because he talks about,
No, the man never owned a single box in his life.
What'd you say?
I said, no, the man never owned a single box in his life.
Yeah, right. We know
it's only baskets, no boxes.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, he talked about how people are on the spectrum, and they'll talk about abstract stuff sometimes, or concrete stuff sometimes. It's more where your focus is, and also, I mean, there's just a bunch bunch of factors to this, but utilitarian versus cooperative, and you do both, but it's more where you tend to your trajectory is in your life. So anyway, that's just a little note there. We've seen a lot of stereotyping in the MBTI community, so it's not like
sure.
Yeah.
And you can't ever completely eliminate that, but you can kind of, it's like, to me, I look at it as there's a certain level of things you have to sort of accept if you're going to accept the system at all, and say, these are in fact patterns that can be observed. So if you deny everything, then you kind of denying reality. But on the other hand, there's nothing wrong with pointing out the exceptions to certain things, because everybody is not some programmed robot that falls into this exact list of stereotypes. So there's different ways of it. I like the fact he uses the word expression or express on a lot of occasions, because like there's different ways to express the type or temperament, as opposed to you are locked into this set of actions because of it. So number 5 question for me says, another belief regarding ESFPs is that they have trouble planning for the long term and lack depth. She put in parentheses, I don't personally agree with this. How do you see this argument? Once again, that's not an argument. But anyway, okay, a belief that they have trouble planning for the long term. I would say that that goes beyond a belief. That's, again, a sort of a pattern observation. And it's not, I don't know if I would word it that we have trouble. I would say that, another thing Kersey sort of reminds us is people tend to practice what they're interested in and thus get better at what they're interested in and not get very good at the things they're not interested in. So I guess perceiver type in general, are less interested in planning, but probably artisans are, SPs are the least likely to be interested in planning. Doesn't mean I'm not capable of it. Or have trouble. I would say trouble, I don't know, that's kind of weird. It's like if that is the thing we're focused on, then we're going to be as good at it as anybody, and maybe even better if it's like that's what we're hyper focused on. Like the thing, I guess, that to me is funny that I sort of realized about myself, and I think is probably true with a lot of other artisans, is that if we're doing planning, then the act of planning itself becomes the action that we're focused on, and we can like put all of ourselves into that, and then turn around and like when it comes to doing the thing we planned, like, well, I'm not really into that anymore. I'm gonna do something else, because it's like that particular thing doesn't seem cool at that time. But at the time you're making the plan was the thing. So there's definitely been some things like that for me, including like times where one of the things I used to have fun imagining when I was a kid was that I was sort of in charge of my own TV network or radio station or, things like that. And so I would sometimes like write, like a schedule of programs of some kind, but the thing is that was what I was into, was the schedule of programs itself was doing that. And so it's not really as much about the payoff. So even as an adult, there was a time where the main thing I was into for a while was watching Doctor Who. And so I, made schedules for Doctor Who watching. But again, it wasn't about because, I wanted to do this organized way of watching Doctor Who. It was just that became in itself fun, because I would have to look at like the lists of the episodes and, copy and paste things over into my list. Like, here's how long it's going to take me to get through this set of stories, this season, or this version of the Doctor, like all these things like that are itself. So it was more about that and the things that went into that particular action than it was me having to make this plan that I needed to stick to, because it's about sticking to a plan. It wasn't like that. So that's kind of sort of the way I look on that. As far as lacking depth, depth is one of those very hard to define. It's a very abstract word in general. I mean, when you're not literally talking about the depth of something, but I mean, when you're talking about with people, there's so many different ways that you can say someone is deep in some way. So I guess in a way I would agree in the sense that I always say that my feelings and my self-esteem and stuff are like right below the surface. Um, but on the other hand, there's certainly like topics and subjects I can discuss that could be described as deep.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you look at my YouTube channel, I've got a whole series that I called Faith and Type, where I interview people about their like entire, history of their beliefs and how they came, and we did some pretty long videos and discussed some pretty, intense things. So, you could say that has some depth, and of course,
Yeah.
a lot of the time I was letting the other person talk. So you could say maybe, maybe me being in the presence of depth, is a problem. But
Yeah.
I expressed some of my viewpoints on the same subject. So it's not that I'm incapable of discussing such things. And I think obviously these topics themselves about talking about the differences in people, you could say is something that has depth to it in terms of it's beyond, just what you have for dinner last night or, that sort of thing. So, honestly, I think again, this goes back to what I said before about interest in practice, because in a general rule, artisans are interested in things that stimulate our senses, and just sitting around and talking for hours and hours about things that don't have any application to reality, that gets kind of boring. But if you can relate it to reality, and you got good examples, especially I think, the older I get and there's more kind of stories you can look back on and talk about like how this applies to things that I've seen in my life,
Mm-hmm.
then it becomes more applicable to reality as opposed to things that are just sort of these pie in the sky concepts. Those are the things I think that most artisans will tend to tune out if there's too much focus on that.
Yeah.
Unless they're on drugs. But if not, then, I think we tend to want to focus more on reality, but it doesn't mean we can't talk about the deeper subjects that are affecting reality. I could put it that way.
As for me, I kind of want to answer this too a little bit because it's kind of
well, I'll allow it.
Yeah, I appreciate that. As far as planning, like for instance, my wife's planning vacation. She likes to plan. She's an ISFJ. She likes to plan months in ahead, and I'm like, oh, like why can't we do this like closer to the time? But no, but of course she gets better prices when she books a hotel like months ahead. So it started to make sense to me, but at the same time, it's kind of like trying to force my concentration to think of plans way in advance is like really hard for me to do. I'm just like, I just don't care enough right now, because like if it's not affecting me right now, it's hard for me to care that much. But if it's exciting enough, it can be something that can be fun to look into and whatnot. It's just and as far as the depth thing, I think like it's funny because there's different, like you said, there's different ways of looking at what is depth, and it's kind of hard to define. But I always thought it meant like how profound a subject is, but I think a lot of times people just use it for even something that might have a lot of trivial details, but you're getting deep into the details. So, if you learn a subject deep in like enough details of it over the years, then you know it in depth, and so I guess that's probably not what's implied by the question, but you could talk about like a mid-range subject like anthropology is sort of like that's grounded in actual human history and concrete events and whatnot, but it's also got a lot of depth to it because it's about human experience and our origins and whatnot, and that's something that like is probably a little easier for a censor to get engaged with, I think, than other things. Like for instance, I have INFJ friends that, like I said it I think in the last video, it's like when you're talking about, and this is the way I'll approach profound subjects, it's like about our human experience and how that relates to I don't know, something that's transcendent. But I focus more on the way it just kind of impacts our lives. And they'll like talk about virtue and then like trajectories of this and that, and like they have all these abstract terms, and then like midway through I'm totally lost and I'm just like, I don't know what you're talking about anymore. But that doesn't mean that, like, I like this quote that one of my favorite I guess authors had. Is basically like, there's nothing wrong with being shallow, even the ocean has a shore. It's like, there's boundaries to everything. So the trivial, the casual, and everyday are no less important than the significant, profound depths of things.
Yeah, I don't take offense when someone calls me shallow. So I guess that's kind of one of those things that,
yeah,
and that's another one of those things I find fascinating, is seeing the difference in temperaments and what they take as like compliments and insults.
mm-hmm.
Because the same things are not appreciated the same way, and that's so much of what life is in terms of what people are motivated by. And I see it all the time at work in terms of the difference in the way, overwhelming majority of people that I encounter are either guardians or artisans.
Mm-hmm.
But there's such a stark contrast when it comes to how they appreciate being appreciated
Yeah.
in terms of what someone says. And the thing is usually the other temperament doesn't get the other one, in terms of they don't understand why they're not happy when they're given a compliment that they would be complimented by.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't really thought about the differences, then there's kind of that communication barrier again. There's sort of puzzle, like, why is this person telling me this, or why, or the other person being like, why are they not happy when I tell them, they're good at this thing. And
like when people tell me, you're such a nice guy, or you have such a great heart, and I'm like, oh, like, seriously? I don't know. I don't want to be seen that way. I want to be seen like, as someone who is kind of edgy, or someone has tough skin or whatever. And it's like, I don't know. It just kind of, I get it. Like, I get that you're saying like I'm a good person and all that, but at the same time I'm kind of like, so I think it was an INFJ who told me probably a couple weeks ago or something. They're like, you remind me of someone who's like maybe a dad who runs a group home or something weird like that. And I was like, oh, that's pretty far from like the rock star aesthetic. And she's like, oh, it's kind of both. I'm like, okay, I can take that.
Yeah. So I had an ESTJ call me old reliable. and that did not please me in any way, really. And whereas a different ESTJ in the same environment told me, I never know quite what you're going to say. And that I took as a compliment. I'm like,
yeah, exactly. Yeah. It's like, you're kind of reckless. I'm like, hell yeah. Yeah, anyway. So we're trying to keep this not as long as the last one. So I'm going to go to the next, my number 5 question. So it says, when you solve a problem, what steps do you usually take? Now, I was thinking about this, like, basically, and I remember this meme that I saw a while back. I'm just going to read it real quick because, well, I'll read it and then I'll tell you what my reaction was. It says, how the ESTP makes decisions. They look at what is observable, what facts are absolutely true, what do they know through experience. And then they consider the logical outcome of each option. They consider which choice will yield the most personally enjoyable outcome. And they look for an option that won't hinder their freedom or will open up more options. I read that and literally I was like, isn't that what everyone does? Wait, are other people not doing this? Is that why they're not enjoying life? Like, what the heck? And it's not like necessarily like, when I'm reading this now, I'm actually thinking, well, I don't actually think about, like, I don't think down the path for each choice that's in front of me, but I sort of just like am looking at all the opportunities or things that I could use, and I kind of go through them one by one, and sometimes I'll just try them out, or sometimes I already know by experience which one would be the best one to go with. But I'm like, that just seems like common sense to me. Does it not to everyone else? But I guess, like, other types, as I've been thinking about this since then, it's like, yeah, I guess other types do kind of think about it differently. Like they'll interpret it according to their values or proper procedure or whatnot. And this describes very much a utilitarian sort of whatever is most expedient kind of pathway. And I'm like, okay.
Yeah, I think everybody does a kind of cost benefit analysis.
Yeah.
It's just what they view the costs and benefits
right
of are different.
Yeah. So, SJs will think more in terms of what's normal or what's accepted or whatnot. And yet also what's practical. I mean, it's not like, the thing about what works, but also within the bounds of normalcy, I guess. And an ESTP like me or SPs in general really are more than willing to, and love to go outside of the box and think of new, different kinds of solutions to things. And by the way, if we want to talk about the difference between us, what like it describes, that meme describes how we'll do logical thinking and kind of like cancel things out that don't seem to make sense and just kind of try to do the most expedient thing. Well, how do you kind of go about making decisions like that? Maybe using your feeling or something? I mean,
yeah, it's not for me to say without sort of the example, of what the decision would be. Because, some things are pretty, I think I talked about this a little bit in the last video, is that, some things are kind of self-evident. It's just sort of like, this is obvious, so I don't spend much time thinking about it. I think the question was about like moral dilemmas or, things or, doing something that would violate your morality or something. If it doesn't rise to the level of being something that crosses one of the, the lines of something like that, then it's probably pretty similar to what you were describing in terms of, it's just what I feel like doing if it's available to me, But,
right.
But obviously one of the big considerations for me, when I became a father and then became a single father, was that a lot of what I did was based around, putting my son first in terms of making sure his needs were met and he had whatever he needed, and providing him as many opportunities to do fun things and, whatever I could. That's kind of what I would focus on first. So I think I evaluated a lot of things just sort of through that filter of, is this going to be something that works for both of us, as opposed to just for me. So
harmony, yeah. A harmonious in a relationship where that's that collaborator sort of role coming out, like whatever corresponds to, you and those you cherish, or the people you're trying to, I guess, create an enjoyable experience for, that kind of thing, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, it's sort of a thing that I enjoyed telling people that, if I just did what the stereotype says and just followed my first instinct on everything, then I would most likely be dead or in prison or, some, on my way to visit one of my 7 kids with 6 different baby mamas, something like that,
Yeah.
But I don't, because number one, like I said, I have consider other people, but also even in my own life, I don't like hassle. And so some of them have just been sort of choices of convenience where I'm like, yeah, I could do this thing that would be fun, temporarily, but then it's going to screw up my life in some way that I don't want to have to deal with the things. I talked about this actually way back when I did the video with NF Geeks, where I talked about my instincts when driving. Like there's many times when I'm on the interstate surrounded by other cars in the other lanes where I have the instinct to just like swerve into traffic, but I don't do it.
Yeah.
And the number one reason is not concern for my safety. You know, a
Mhm.
guardian would probably be like, well, that would be stupid. You might get hurt. I'm not even caring about that. I'm like, you know, the hassle of what happens afterwards with, you know, messing with insurance
Yeah.
and, you know, if I was injured, having to deal with like hospital bills and things, you know, that
Mhm.
kind of crap is what I don't want to deal with. I'm
Yeah.
not really me saying, oh, this would be wrong. You know,
Yeah.
it's not a moral decision, and it's not a, oh, I'm afraid of doing this to myself. I mean, that fear is involved, just in
Mhm.
the sense that I don't want to, you know, be like horribly disfigured but still alive, you know, or like, you know, injured in some way where I'm experiencing extreme pain but not actually killed, you know, and I don't want to kill other people or harm them. So, you know,
Yeah.
I'm not going to say there's no moral things involved or fear involved. All of those elements come into play. But if I was going to say the number one reason that I wouldn't do that, it would be because I'm like, it's going to be too much hassle. So,
That's hilarious.
which,
Yeah.
you know, I remember telling that to a particular idealist that I worked with, and she was just kind of dumbfounded by that would be the number one consideration.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. For me, what keeps me from going totally off the rails is just literally, it's like critically thinking about, you know, well, that's kind of dumb. That would be stupid to do, you know, like, and um, my critical thinking kind of keeps me sober and not from like going wildly over the edge. So, you know, for you, it seems like what you're saying is you would just like it would be a bad experience and you would feel like, oh, totally put off by like all this hassle and everything. And for me, it's just kind of like I'm thinking through that, like, nah, that's not such a good idea. You know, like it's just more of like this. I'm trying to figure out the right word for it, but it's not so much emotional. It's just kind of like thinking through it soberly, you know. But
Yeah, like I said, the cost benefit analysis. So it's like, do the benefits of the entertainment value that I'll get from this outweigh the cost of all of the hassle? You know, is it so dumb that it's not worth it? You know, because I can do plenty of dumb things that are entertaining but don't hurt anybody or
yeah,
cause like a long-term hassle. It's kind of finding that balance. You know, dumb enough to be enjoyable, but not so dumb that it causes a problem.
yeah. Now here's another thing that might be a difference, but you can kind of bounce off of this. But sometimes I will like I now that I'm 36 now, so all this life experience behind me, I have a better idea of what how to joke and how not to joke. But I did a lot of experimenting when I was younger, and I'll give a little scenario here because this is kind of a crazy one. But I grew up in Texas, and I don't know if it was just
Hey,
like
what a coincidence! So did I.
nice. But there was this goth girl, and I hung out with goths and punks and whatnot. So, but there was this goth girl who's like, I remember I was at a bus stop after school, and we were waiting for the bus, and all of a sudden, out of nowhere, and but I was kind of quiet back then, so I was just kind of like, you know, I didn't really talk that much, but she was just crazy, and she just like got down on one knee, and she's like, will you have my babies? Will you give birth to my babies or something like that? And she held out her hands, and I was just like, I stood there and was like, no, it's like flat out. But you know, I didn't want to even lead her on, even through a joke and whatnot, even though I thought it was kind of funny. But so this was kind of what I was used to, like girls just kind of like joking around like that, and it was like, I think even just in general culture there. There's more of a lightheartedness and people don't take you too seriously. Now became a camp counselor a few years later in Washington State, and so I gave that story as a backdrop to kind of lead up to why I decided to make such a crazy joke. This was like my first week, and there was a bunch of kids running around, and there was this girl. I think she was like probably an ISFJ. She was also a counselor. And I was like, I don't remember exactly what I said, but something along the lines of, we should make cute little kids like this too. It was just totally like crazy, like over the edge, just like I didn't even really know her, right? But we had done like a week of training before then and all that, so we kind of gotten to know each other a little bit. But she just totally reacted like, oh my god, and I had a friend I'd known for a bit who was a counselor too, and she was the one who actually kind of helped me get that job. But we had this system where you send notes to each other, and each person had like little pocket or whatever you slip notes into. And I got a note, it was like, basically, my friend was basically like, yeah, you totally threw her off with that. And maybe it'd be good to apologize, like, oh crap. But I've done a lot of like crazy stuff like that where I'm not like really always necessarily sensitive, like where I just kind of know through feeling like, oh, this person's going to be hurt by this or offended by this or whatnot. It's just like I have to kind of just think about it, because I'm not really that sensitive myself, and so so that's kind of, I do that cost benefit analysis, but that's kind of that thing where it's like I don't, that emotional side is not too easily accessed by me. We all have feelings, but it's something that's a little bit more subconscious for me. And so anyway, this is a little story to illustrate how I kind of try to process things, and I'm pretty good at it now. I mean, I avoid pretty much every pitfall now, but I had a lot of growing up to do, to say the least.
Yeah, well, I'll wrap up with this because you reminded me. I've told this story on a few different videos I've done, but I figure it's the closest. Maybe illustrates similarity and a difference, because it goes back to sort of the question about the adrenaline, maybe also. Because obviously, as I've said, the thing I get the most thrill out of is performing, in some sense, entertaining people, and improvisation, especially, is more fun than scripted stuff. And so there was a particular time, I don't remember how old I was, probably like 11 or 12, something like that, maybe even younger, I don't remember for sure. But I was at the mall with a friend of mine, and we had gone to a movie, but we were waiting, I guess, for his mom to pick us up or something like that. And I think what it was is, she had done something in the mall and brought his two sisters. He had younger twin sisters, and it was in the winter time. So outside it was cold, but in the mall it was heated, so it was too hot to keep the jacket on. So I was holding this heavy jacket, and at some point in the course of conversation, I decided to go for the slapstick humor, and I hit him with the jacket. Not like super hard, but I just like kind of conked him over the head. And his sisters thought this was hilarious. They started, giggling like crazy. So as soon as that happened, he was like, I got this rush from the fact that I'd gotten this audience response, from, obviously I wouldn't have described it that way at the time, but that, looking back, I know that's what it was, is that I got caught up in the thrill of doing this. Well, he told me to stop, but it was, at that point, it was like a comedy routine, so like I would hit him with the jacket, he would say to stop, and it's like we're going back and forth like we're doing a two-man show. The only problem was only one of us was willingly participating in the show. He was actually getting really mad at me while they were continuing to giggle about it, and it was like I was caught up in the thrill of the entertainment and didn't stop and realize that he was actually like, mad at me and hurt by this. And at one point he even said, I thought we were friends. It's kind of one of those things, growing up, that's sort of like that, line that gets drawn, like, you're like, whoa, wait, maybe I went too far here. Because I've heard that more than once. And, I don't remember if I apologized to him. I probably did, but it probably took me a little bit to realize kind of, what had happened. But, I that's one of those situations where I could say, well, or somebody could say, if they were just looking at on paper, well, your type is supposed to have these feelings and, And, so wouldn't you care about the person's feelings and be aware of this and not do this? And I'm like, it's not that it's completely shut off, but it is sort of like, there are times where sort of the temperament supersedes the other aspects of it. And that was probably one of it, in terms of my instinct was to continue doing the thing that was getting the reaction and the audience response, and not really considering what the other effects were. And again, I was a kid. Obviously, as an adult, I'd have a little more awareness, probably. I think I'd sort of, but, I can still relate, that was an instance where it was sort of like the adrenaline of that situation was more than the other. So
yeah, so we're all a lot alike in that, I guess. It reminded me of a story. When I was in second grade, there's this girl that I got along with really well, and we were friends and all that. And I just thought it'd be funny one time when she went to sit down to just slip the chair out from under her, and she just fell down, and just like she got really pissed at me. And I thought it would just be, kind of all in fun and all. You reminded me of that. It's like I tend to learn pretty quick though. When that happened, I realized, oh yeah, I probably better not do stuff like that again. But I mean, it would be interesting to explore more of the difference between our types. But I think we're a lot alike. I mean, it's kind of hard to really pick that apart. I mean,
well, we can talk about that, off air, and maybe we'll figure out a way to do a video on that subject and kind of maybe focus it a little more on particular things, so we can explore that. So anyway, I believe that wraps up these questions. So thanks everybody who watches this, and thanks to Typecast Heroes for the questions. And we'll talk again soon, I'm sure.
Go later.
Bye-bye.